A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. What if the best model for writing a sci-fi podcast script or a complex screenplay isn't GPT-4 or Gemini, but a model specifically fine-tuned for, well, roleplay? Today's prompt from Daniel is about exactly that. He's asking us to look past the obvious use cases for these specialized models and see if there's a technical edge there for professional creative work.
It's a fascinating question, Corn. I'm Herman Poppleberry, and I've been diving into the documentation for some of these specialized 2026 releases. There is a real technical divergence happening right now. By the way, a quick shout out to Google Gemini 3 Flash, which is actually powering our script generation today. It's interesting to use a frontier general model to discuss these niche roleplay specialists.
It is meta, isn't it? We're basically asking the generalist to explain why the specialist might be better at its own job. Daniel's prompt doesn't mince words. He assumes, like most people do, that roleplay models is just a polite industry term for AI erotica. And he's not wrong, is he? That's where the money is.
You have to call a spade a spade. The primary economic driver for the development of models like AION 2.0 from AION Labs has been the demand for unfiltered, intimate, and character-driven interaction. In the AI world, that usually means NSFW content. But if we stop there, we miss the forest for the trees. The technical requirements to make a model good at roleplay are actually the exact same requirements for high-level narrative fiction and complex dialogue.
So, let's define the terms. When we say a roleplay model, what are we actually looking at under the hood? Is it just a base model that's had its safety filters ripped out? Or is there more to the architecture?
It's significantly more than just uncensoring. A true roleplay model like the AION 2.0 70B parameter model released back in February is fine-tuned on a very specific type of dataset. General models are trained on the whole internet. Wikipedia, Reddit, Stack Overflow, news articles. They are optimized to be helpful assistants. They want to give you a list of bullet points or a polite summary.
Which is why they often sound like a corporate HR manual. I've noticed that if you ask a general model to write a scene between two people arguing, it often tries to resolve the conflict by the third paragraph. It's like it can't help being helpful.
Precisely the problem. Roleplay models are fine-tuned on millions of lines of multi-turn dialogue, screenplays, and collaborative fiction. Their objective function isn't help the user solve a problem, it's maintain character consistency and narrative momentum. That shift in the training objective changes everything about how the model handles context in prose.
I want to dig into that character consistency piece. In a standard LLM, if you have a long conversation, the model starts to drift. It forgets that a character is supposed to be grumpy, or it starts adopting the user's tone. How do the roleplay models solve that?
It's a mix of dataset quality and what's called narrative persistence training. In models like AION 2.0, the training data includes character cards, dense descriptions of a personality's traits, history, and speech patterns. The model is specifically penalized during training if it deviates from those instructions over a long context. We're talking about models that can maintain a specific, idiosyncratic voice over 10,000 or 20,000 tokens of dialogue without sliding back into that AI assistant persona.
That sounds incredibly useful for what we do. If we're writing a script for My Weird Prompts, we need the Corn voice and the Herman voice to remain distinct. A general model often blends us together into one mid-level intellectual blob, if the prompt isn't perfect.
And that brings us to the first major technical advantage, the reduction of sanitization overhead. General models spend a huge amount of their cognitive energy, for lack of a better term, navigating safety guardrails. When you ask GPT-4 a question, it's constantly checking, is this offensive? Is this medical advice? Am I being too biased? That layer of RLHF reinforcement learning from human feedback tends to flatten the prose. It makes the language predictable.
It's the as an AI language model energy. Even if it doesn't say the phrase, you can feel it lurking in the background, smoothing out all the sharp edges.
Right. Roleplay models like AI on 2.0 are often obliterated or fine-tuned with a much lighter touch on the moralizing. This doesn't just mean they'll talk about taboo topics, it means they are allowed to use more colorful language, more varied sentence structures, and more realistic human emotion. They can be sarcastic, they can be wrong, they can be biased, which is exactly what you need for a compelling character.
Let's look at AI on 2.0 specifically. It's a 70B parameter model. That's a decent size, but it's not a frontier giant like the trillion parameter monsters. Why is that 70B range the sweet spot for these roleplay enthusiasts?
Efficiency and steerability. At 70B, you have enough intelligence to understand complex subtext and irony, but the model is small enough that you can run it on consumer-grade hardware or affordable cloud GPUs like what we use on Modal. But the real magic of Ion 2.0 is its performance on the long roleplay benchmark. This is a metric that specifically tests how well a model tracks world state and character facts over a massive conversation.
Give me a concrete example. If I'm writing a story about a heist, what does Ion 2.0 do that a general model fails at?
In a general model, if you mention on page 2 that the protagonist has a limp, and then you have 10 pages of dialogue about the plan, by page 12, the model might describe the protagonist sprinting effortlessly away from the guards. It loses the specific constraint because it's prioritizing the exciting escape trope over the character fact. Ion 2.0 is trained to treat those character constraints as hard anchors. It checks the character card or the early context with much higher attention weight.
That's fascinating. It's essentially a specialized memory management system. It's not just that it has a bigger window, it's that it knows what's in that window is non-negotiable for the story.
And it goes deeper into the prose itself. One of the biggest complaints about general models in 2026 is slop, that repetitive, flowery, but ultimately empty writing style. In the ever-evolving landscape a testament to, it's a delicate balance. Roleplay models are often trained on de-slopped datasets. They are taught to use visceral, direct language. If a character is angry, they don't say, "I find your actions quite problematic and would appreciate a more collaborative approach." They say, "Get out of my face."
I can see why the creative community is starting to pivot toward these. But let's address the flip side. If I'm using AI on 2.0 to write a technical script about, say, battery chemistry, is it going to hallucinate a romance between the lithium and the cobalt?
That's the trade-off. These models are not optimized for factual retrieval. If you ask a roleplay model for the exact chemical formula of a proprietary electrolyte, it might give you something that sounds plausible but is chemically impossible, because its primary goal is to keep the conversation flowing. It's a creative tool, not an encyclopedia. You wouldn't use a paintbrush to drive a nail, and you shouldn't use AI on 2.0 to write a safety manual for a nuclear reactor.
So it's about choosing the right tool for the task. We've talked on this show before about the one model to rule them all, myth. It feels like 2026 is the year that myth finally dies. We're seeing a fragmentation.
It's the AI long tail. You have the giants like Gemini and OpenAI providing the foundational utility, and then you have this explosion of specialized models for coding, for legal analysis, and for narrative roleplay. AI 2.0 is essentially a creative coprocessor.
Let's get to the meta part of Daniel's prompt. He asked if these models would be better at generating our podcast scripts. We've been using a variety of models for my weird prompts over the last year. If we threw AI on 2.0 at a script, what would change?
I actually ran a test on this before we started recording. I took a prompt about the geopolitics of semiconductors and gave it to both GPT-4 and AI on 2.0 with our host personas as the characters.
Oh, I'm dying to hear this. How did GPT-4 handle us?
GPT-4 was, okay, it got the Herman is nerdy part, but it made me sound like a stereotypical professor. It had me saying things like, "That is a very astute observation, Korn." Let us examine the silicon supply chain. It felt like a scripted educational show for middle schoolers. It was safe, it was balanced, and it was incredibly boring.
And AI on 2.0? Did it make me a sarcastic sloth who refuses to move?
It was much closer to our actual dynamic. It picked up on the fact that you like to poke holes in my enthusiasm. In the Ion script, you interrupted my explanation of lithography to ask if I'd actually been outside in the last 48 hours. It captured the cheeky edge that the system prompt asks for, but it did it naturally, without me having to force it with 5 paragraphs of instructions.
That's the subtext capability you mentioned. It understands the vibe of a relationship, not just the transcript of the words.
Right? Because it's trained on fiction, it understands that human conversation isn't just about exchanging information, it's about status, humor, and emotional subcurrents. A general model thinks a podcast is a spoken Wikipedia article. A role-play model knows a podcast is a performance.
So why aren't we using AI on 2.0 for every episode then? If the dialogue is better and the characters are more us, what's the catch?
The catch is the intellectual depth floor. While AI on 2.0 is great at the flavor of the conversation, it can struggle with the high-level synthesis of complex new data. If Daniel sends us a prompt about a brand new white paper that came out yesterday, AI on 2.0 might get the tone perfect, but mess up the actual technical findings. It might prioritize a funny joke over an accurate explanation of a new neural architecture.
So the ideal workflow for a creator in 2026 is actually a multi-model pipeline. You might use Gemini or GPT-4 to do the heavy lifting on the research and the structural outline, the what of the episode, and then you pass that what through a model like AI on 2.0 to handle the how, the prose, the character voices, the pacing.
That is exactly where the industry is heading. We're moving away from prompting, a single box, and toward orchestrating a fleet of models. You use the logic model for the facts and the creative model for the delivery.
I love that idea of a creative co-processor. It's like having a writer's room where one person is the fact checker and the other is the punch-up artist. But let's go back to Daniel's point about the spade being a spade. If I'm a professional writer and I want to use Aeon 2, do I have to wade through a bunch of NSFW settings and waifu character cards to get my work done?
That is a legitimate barrier to entry for some. If you go to the places where these models are most popular, sites like Hugging Face or specialized role-play hubs, the community is very much focused on the waifu side of things. The documentation is filled with examples that might make a corporate creative director blush, but the underlying weights of the model don't care about the application.
It's just math at the end of the day. The model doesn't know it's being used for a My Weird Prompt script or a gothic romance. It just knows it's being asked to predict the next token based on a specific set of character constraints.
And for the pro user, you don't use those consumer-facing web interfaces anyway. You use an API. You connect to a provider like Replicate, or you host it yourself on Modal, and you give it your own system prompt. You bypass the silly tavern UI and the anime avatars, and you treat it like any other piece of professional infrastructure.
It's a bit like how the early internet was built on the back of, well, similar industries. The technology for streaming video and online payments was pushed forward by the adult industry, and then it became the backbone of Netflix and Amazon. It feels like we're seeing a repeat of that with LLMs. The demand for unfiltered roleplay is funding the research into long context coherence and creative prose that the respectable companies are too scared to touch.
It's a perfect analogy. Anthropic and Google are essentially building the broadcast TV version of AI safe, educational, and slightly bland. The roleplay community is building the indie cinema version, raw, experimental, and sometimes messy, but far more interesting from an artistic perspective.
So, if I'm a listener and I'm a writer or a podcaster or even just someone who wants to write a better Dungeons and Dragons campaign, what's the move? How do I actually test this without feeling like I'm doing something weird?
My advice is to look for the 70B models that mention prose or narrative in their descriptions. AI on 2.0 is the gold standard right now, but there are others in that family. Take a piece of dialogue you've written or even a prompt you've given to a general model and run it through a roleplay tuned model. Tell it, you are a master playwright. Your goal is to rewrite this scene to maximize character tension and remove all AI typical platitudes.
Remove all AI typical platitudes. That should be a button on every keyboard.
You'll be shocked at the difference. It's like the model wakes up. It stops trying to please you and starts trying to tell a story. That shift from assistant to storyteller is the core of why roleplay models matter.
What about the uncensored part? Daniel mentioned that roleplay models are often uncensored. Does that actually help with creativity? Or is it just about being able to use swear words?
It's about the boundaries of thought. If a model is trained to never discuss anything violent, it can't write a convincing Shakespearean tragedy. If it's trained to never be offensive, it can't write a villain. A truly great story needs conflict, and conflict often involves things that corporate safety filters are designed to suppress. By using an uncensored roleplay model, you're giving yourself access to the full spectrum of human experience.
It's the difference between writing a PG-rated movie and an R-rated one. It's not that you have to use the mature themes, but having them available makes the whole world feel more grounded and real.
And it avoids the safety lecture mid-sentence. Nothing kills a creative flow faster than the model stopping and saying, I cannot fulfill this request because it potentially violates my policy on depicting interpersonal disagreement.
Interpersonal disagreement. I've actually had that happen. I was trying to write a scene where two brothers were arguing about who ate the last of the bamboo, and the AI told me it couldn't promote hostile family dynamics.
See? That's the AI schoolmarm effect. AI on 2.0 doesn't care about your bamboo-based sibling rivalry. It will lean into it. It will make the argument hilarious and bitter and real.
So, let's wrap this section with a practical takeaway. If we're looking at the future of My Weird Prompts, maybe we should be looking at a ion-flavored draft for some of our more narrative episodes.
I think it's inevitable. As the models get better, the generalist becomes the manager and the specialist becomes the craftsman. Aeon Labs is just the first of many companies that are going to realize that roleplay is a much bigger market than just erotica. It's the market for all like a creative writing.
It's funny how we've gone from AI is a calculator for words to AI is a method actor.
And just like a good method actor, sometimes they're hard to deal with, but the performance is worth it.
Let's talk about the second-order effects of this. If everyone starts using specialized roleplay models for their creative work, does human-like dialogue become a commodity? Does the value shift away from the quality of the prose and back toward the originality of the idea?
That's the billion-dollar question. If anyone can generate a Tarantino-esque dialogue scene by just clicking a button on Aeon 3.0 in a year or two, then being good at dialogue isn't a rare skill anymore. The skill becomes the curation and the prompt engineering, knowing how to set the stage and when to tell the AI to take a different path.
It's the move from being the painter to being the director. You're not holding the brush, but you're responsible for the vision. And that requires a different kind of technical literacy. You need to know which model has which bias. You need to know that Aeon handles long-term memory better, but maybe a different model like Claude is better at poetic metaphors.
It's model fluency. And I think that's what Daniel is hitting on with his prompt. He works in tech comms and AI automation. He sees that the one-size-fits-all approach is a temporary phase. The future is a model marketplace where you pick your cast of AIs based on their specific training.
The model marketplace. I like that. It sounds like a sci-fi bazaar where you can buy a 1940s noir module or a hard science fiction logic gate.
We're basically there already. If you look at platforms like Hugging Face, it's exactly that. Thousands of fine-tuned models, each with a slightly different soul if you want to be poetic about it.
So, to answer Daniel's question, what are roleplay models useful for beyond the obvious? They are useful for truth. Ironically, by being characters, they can be more honest about the human condition than a helpful assistant. That's been lobotomized into being nice to everyone.
That's a deep point, Korn. The assistant is a mask. The roleplay character is an exploration.
And on that note, let's move into some practical takeaways for the listeners. If you're sitting there wondering how to apply this to your own life or work, here's what we suggest.
First, if you're a creator, stop relying on a single model. If you've been using GPT-4 for everything, you're missing out on the flavor that specialized models can provide. Go to a platform that hosts AI on 2.0 or similar 70B models and try a side-by-side comparison. Give it a character description and a scene and see which one feels more alive.
Second, pay attention to context coherence. If you're working on a long project, a novel, a long-form business plan, a series of blog posts, look for models that perform well on roleplay benchmarks. Even if you aren't role-playing, that ability to track facts over 20,000 tokens is a superpower for any kind of complex work.
And third, don't be afraid of the uncensored label. It doesn't mean you're going to get something offensive. It just means the AI isn't going to lecture you. It gives you back the steering wheel. You are the one in charge of the tone and the content, not a safety committee in San Francisco.
It's about autonomy. We talk a lot on this show about who owns your LLM and who controls the output. Using a specialized, often open-weights model like AI on 2.0 is a way of taking back that control.
It's a tool for the sovereign creator, and I think that's a very powerful shift.
All right, I think we've thoroughly dissected the spade. Daniel, thanks for the prompt. It's a good reminder that the most interesting tech often comes from the most weird corners of the internet.
It always does. The weird is where the innovation happens.
Before we wrap up, a big thanks to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the wheels on this bus.
And a huge thank you to Modal for providing the GPU credits that allow us to run these kinds of tests and power the show. We couldn't do the deep dives without that compute.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you found this dive into roleplay models useful, maybe leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. It actually helps more than you'd think to get the show in front of other people who like to nerd out on this stuff.
We're also on Telegram if you want to get notified the second a new episode drops. Just search for My Weird Prompts.
Find us at myweirdprompts.com for all the links and the full archive. We'll be back next time with whatever weirdness Daniel throws our way.
Can't wait. See ya.
Stay weird. This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My Weird Prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep